This meeting is being recorded.
Okay. Good evening, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, the University of the West Indies students and staff, distinguished attendees from Guyana, Trinidad and Tobago, and the United States, distinguished attendees from elsewhere, welcome to the book launch, Oil and Climate Change in Guyana's Wet Neighborhood, Probing Promise and Potential Peril, written by Professor Ivor Griffith and published through Ian Randall Publishers 2025. This launch is a partnership between the University of the West Indies Mona Campus, Departments of Government, and the Mona School of Business and Management, and the Caribbean Policy Consortium. The book is indeed timely, with its message that Guyana's future depends on its ability to turn oil wealth into climate resilience. Without proper governance for balancing oil prosperity with sustainability, the oil boom could fuel inequality, it could fuel corruption, and it could fuel environmental degradation. As we proceed through this session, please place your questions in the chat. We will have a short question and answer session after the panelists' presentations. We kickstart this evening's forum with greetings from Dr. Lisa Vassiani, the head of the Department of Government, the University of the West Indies. Dr. Vassiani?
Hello, good afternoon, colleagues. Let me try that again. Good afternoon, colleagues. Is everyone hearing me?
Yes, it's much better.
Okay, thank you. Good evening, everyone. Welcome. As Professor Horton said, we are collaborating on this very timely book launch. It's my pleasure to welcome you from the Department of Government on the launch of this very timely publication, Oil and Climate Change in Guyana's Wet Neighborhood, Probing Promise and Potential Peril. We're during a period when the Caribbean is navigating profound transformation and several geopolitical shifts. So this work is not just another academic contribution, but it's actually quite a critical intervention in a period that defines our conversations. How do small states respond to sudden resource wealth, confronting the existential threat of climate change? And so, from a geopolitical perspective, Guyana's emergence as a major oil-producing state has altered regional and hemispheric dynamics. And it has also repositioned the Caribbean within global energy dynamics. It has also attracted new strategic partnerships and intensified the interest of great powers within our region. So now, in several different ways, Guyana sits at a very important intersection of energy security, economic development, perhaps even environmental vulnerability, and international diplomacy. The publication is also quite historical because, as we know, Caribbean economies have long wrestled with issues of structural dependency, narrow export bases, and whether we like to say this or not, the lingering effects of colonial economics. So the discovery of oil, as Professor Griffith explores, represents for us the possibility of rewriting or setting a different agenda in our history. one that moves us away from vulnerability and dependence, perhaps to one of greater economic agency. So this is a timely publication, and it courageously explores both sides of the reality that Caribbean states have endured. And so I welcome you and I congratulate Professor Griffith for this timely conversation, for this timely publication. And I encourage scholars, policymakers, students of international relations and public policy to explore this work and explore the ways in which the Caribbean region and Guyana in particular situate ourselves in writing our own history. And so, ladies and gentlemen, the story of Caribbean development is still being written, and Professor Griffith has been a long-standing contributor to the development of this history. So welcome everyone, and congratulations once again to Professor Griffith on this wonderful publication. Thank you, Professor Horton.
Yes. Thank you, Dr. Vassiani, for sharing your insights on the book and Professor Griffith's contribution. We now welcome Mr. Ian Randall from Ian Randall Publishers, the book's publishing house. Mr. Randall will contextualize the recent books his press have published on Jamaica and Guyana, including, of course, Oil and Climate Change in Guyana's Wet Neighborhood, Probing Promise and Potential Peril. So, Mr. Randall, over to you.
Thank you, Professor Vassiani and Professor Horton. My role here this evening I see as really expressing gratitude as a publisher to the Department of Government and to the Mona School of Business for organizing this launch. Launches for us really are celebrations of the work of the author and to make the work as widely known as possible. This book has been out now for 9 months, and it might seem that 9 months later, why are you launching a book? When in fact there have been other events. But I think this is a work that really needs to be kept in the public attention because from our perspective, enough attention hasn't been paid to this book. And I might be bold and say, especially not in Guyana. And in fact, you know, my impetus for producing this book was as much for the wider public, but specifically for Guyanese, because I think they ought to know and have as much information about what's happening in their country as anyone else. The other constituency I think really needs to pay attention to this book is, of course, the media, because there's so little in-depth information readily available to people who write news stories and to write background stories. And I've sincerely hoped that the media would have taken this book, because the kinds of basic information that Professor Griffith has in this book is absolutely vital for anybody working on and reporting on events in Guyana. So, you know, just by way of saying what our motivation is, that's my reasoning. But also I wanted to claim some responsibility for the initiative, because it's one of the few occasions in which we get inundated with so many projects. It's one of the few occasions in which we actually go out and commission something. And this book was actually commissioned by us, having read over a period of time, maybe 2 years, the kinds of articles that Professor Griffith was publishing. And as he says in his preface, I approached him to put together what I thought would have been a short monograph of 25 to 30,000 words. At the end of the day, we got a book of over 100,000 words. And much as we've tried to get our authors to stay away from big books, because big books are out of vogue these days, I can't say that there was a single chapter in this book that wasn't necessary. So, Professor Griffith and I go back a long way, back to old CSA meeting days, to 2002, when we published his first book on Caribbean security in the age of terror. And significantly, when we partnered to develop, start and launch University of Guyana Press. I can't remember the exact date now, when Professor Griffith was the Vice Chancellor. And I'm particularly happy to note, as he says in his preface, that this is his first work on his native country, Guyana. And, I feel privileged to have been the one to do this. So that's all I have to say. I hope you all have a fruitful discussion. And alas, I can't stay for the entire session, but I'll stay as long as I can to actually learn something more. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Randall. We are very happy indeed that this book is numbered among the books your publishing house has published on Jamaica and Guyana. At this point, we would normally welcome the book's author, Professor Ivelaw Lloyd Griffith. Professor Griffith has an illustrious academic career. He has written over 10 books and many scholarly book chapters and articles. He has also served at the highest levels at universities in the United States and in the Caribbean, including serving as provost, vice chancellor, and principal. He is renowned for his work on Caribbean security, including national and human security, and he is the fellow with Caribbean Policy Consortium and a senior associate with the Center for Strategic and International Studies in Washington, D.C. However, due to uncontrollable circumstances, Professor Griffith is unable to join us at this session today. Dr. Scott MacDonald, another illustrious scholar, will be speaking about the book on Professor Griffith's behalf. Dr. Scott MacDonald is a Caribbean Policy Consortium Fellow as well. He's also a Chief Economist at Smith Research and Gradings. He's the author of about 19 books and numerous articles on economic affairs in Latin America and the Caribbean, Europe, Asia, and North America. So please help me welcome Dr. Scott MacDonald to share his insights about this very important book, Oil and Climate Change in Guyana's Wet Neighborhood, Probing Promise and Potential Peril. Dr. MacDonald?
Well, thank you very much for having me here tonight. I have to admit it's an unexpected pleasure to be here in Professor Griffith's stead. I wish the circumstances were different. I'd also like to say he has left me with very large shoes to fill tonight. He's an impressive scholar. His book is certainly wonderful. I also want to make a plug to Ian Randall and say thanks for pushing him to do it. I know there were times when he bemoaned the fact a little because it was a lot of work, but I think it's been a wonderful product. I'd also like to thank the Faculty of Social Sciences, Department of Government, and the Mona School of Business and Management at UWI, as well, of course, as the Caribbean Policy Consortium. Everybody's used the same words that the book is timely. It's very timely. I'll add that to that. It is an ambitious, it's a seminal work. It's well researched, it's well written. Yeah, and it's close to 400 pages with an extensive bibliography. I think it's over around 40 pages. But why the book? Why Guyana? Why is it topical? Timing is everything. Two large forces loom over the global economy: a voracious appetite for energy, being given a new major push by the AI revolution, and deep-seated concerns about climate change. And while climate change may have lost some of its importance in US policymaking circles, it is an existential threat in the Caribbean. And how do small states deal with these particular issues? As the late Jamaican diplomat and scholar Richard Burnell once stated on the issue of climate change to a largely American audience, if you don't help us deal with climate change, we're all going to come and visit you. So it is an issue that impacts both sides of the street, north and south, in that regard. Guyana certainly looms large in the energy picture. It's producing close to 1 million barrels per day. We'll eventually get there fairly soon if it already hasn't. It has overtaken Colombia, Ecuador, and Argentina as oil producers. It's moving up the ranks very rapidly. It's repositioned the Caribbean in terms of where it sits in global geoeconomics. Guyana has made itself part of a core energy group that Tony Bryan has called the Southern Caribbean Energy Matrix, which includes Suriname and Trinidad and Tobago. According to energy consultant Wood Mackenzie, as of early 2025, over the next 15 years, ExxonMobil and its partners, Chevron and CNOOC, would likely generate profit of $182 billion from Guyanese oil fields. Guyana's takings are forecast to amount to more than $190 billion. So it's big money as well that's involved here. The impact on Guyana obviously has been considerable. In 2015, ExxonMobil discovered commercial reserves of oil, Guyana's offshore. 2019, the oil began to pump. And according to the World Bank, Guyana's economic growth is unprecedented. And I love reading these GDP numbers, real GDP growth numbers. In 2019, the economy only grew 5.4%. 2020, it grew at 43.5%. 2021, they slacked off. It was 20.1%. 2022, you're looking at 63.6%. Momentum continued all the way through to where we are now. Last year, I think the IMF said 19.3%, and the forecast for the IMF for this year is 22%. GDP, the actual size of the economy, grew from about 5 billion in 2019 to roughly about 25 to 26 billion last year. It's important, and this is one of the points that Professor Griffith emphasizes. It's not just oil growth, but it's been accompanied by non-oil growth sector, including agriculture, construction, and services. It's also seen a significant investment in the country's infrastructure, which has been in bad need of facelift. And that goes from roads and ports to human capital. Per capita income has also gone up, though there are concerns over distribution of national wealth. The World Bank came up with the real GDP number per capita of in 2005, it was a little over 1,000, and now it's around 29,675. So there's been quite the transformation. Professor Griffith divided his book into 7 chapters, including an introduction, which he posits the questions, contemplating promise and peril, and a conclusion. Chapter 2 discusses the political environment in Guyana. Chapter 3 examines the treasure chest of Guyana's energy sources. I like the fact that he talked about the basement, and the basement being the subterranean part where oil and gas is generated from. Chapter 4 and 5 discuss the Essequibo neighborhood, its importance and context in the geopolitical implications of Venezuela's ongoing aggression. Chapter 6 discusses what he calls as the wet neighborhood, the risk of inundation from the Atlantic of the country's coastal region, most of which is below sea level. And in that chapter, he also discussed other risks such as heavy rainfall, coastal flooding, sea level rise, storm surges, and heat waves. And chapter 7 ponders the future of promise and peril. Anyone looking to oil and climate change for a simplistic bullish forecast of oil-driven growth will be disappointed. The book is about balance and dealing with tough questions. Oil is one side of the coin, the environment is another side of the coin. As Professor Griffith notes, Guyana is experiencing a paradoxical existence in which the exciting promise of petropower coexists with the potential peril of climate change, where the country's environmental security is endangered, thus compromising the full benefits of the oil bounty. What elevates the book from just being a discussion on the politics and economics of petrostates and with an eye to the rest of the Caribbean is that Guyana's efforts to address climate change are very important, especially from an oil producer. Along these lines, Professor Griffith praises that Guyana embraced the Low Carbon Development Strategy, LCDS, in 2009, the first to do so in the Global South. He notes, it outlined a vision for inclusive, sustainable development while maintaining the country's forests, which cover about 87% of the country, to help meet some of the world's most pressing challenges. Guyana has maintained the second highest percentage of forest cover in the world after Suriname, with some 18.4 million hectares intact. The forest stores 19.5 billion tons of carbon dioxide equivalent, which is the measure used for the greenhouse emissions that cause climate change. It is estimated that the world emits about 50 billion tons a year. So Guyana, as Professor Griffith has stressed, has made a very important contribution. He also praises the Guyanese government's building of Silica City, which is meant to be the country's first fully sustainable and technologically advanced city, strategically located 30 miles from Georgetown, and it's relatively close to the Jetty Jagan International Airport. But he is concerned that while some Guyanese can afford to relocate, the economically more challenged still face water levels that will become lapping at their doors at some point in the not too far distant future. Silica City and other parts of the Environmental Security Investment Plan are critical, considering that Guyana's wet neighborhood aggravates environmental vulnerability. Georgetown lies along the coast, and 80% of the country's population resides in the capital city and other coastal towns and villages. He notes that Georgetown is forecast to be fully or partially underwater by 2030 if no radical mitigation efforts are adopted. He mentions other perils in the book. He talks about the concerns about overdependency on oil, Venezuela's claims on 74% of Guyana's sovereign territory. He underscored Venezuela's 2023 referendum on the Essequibo. And I think, it's yet to be seen what happens with the change of government in Venezuela, but it remains, I would say, a clear and present danger for Guyana security. He also talks about political rancor. As he stated, Guyana has experienced considerable political rancor, deeply impacted by decades-old racial animosity. This has been accentuated by, in recent times, the discovery of massive offshore oil deposits in 2015 and the contestation of power in 2020. In this, he regarded the 2025 elections as significant. And one last point, which I thought was very good, was the need for better transparency and disclosure. How do you manage the relations with large oil companies? How do you make sure that the money that comes into the country goes to the people it's intended to? And I just looked at the Transparency International's ranking of Guyana. Guyana is 92 out of 180 countries. It's far better than Venezuela, which is 178 out of 180, but there's plenty of room for improvement in that regard. One of the things I liked about it, he said, together, political stability and racial harmony constitute a sine qua non, an essential condition for the people of Guyana to meaningfully benefit from the potential that petropower has already made manifest. This requires action by the governing elites and the corporate influencers to foster tolerance, inclusiveness, and equity, and eschew vindictiveness. He ends his book on a hopeful note. He quotes Dame Jane Morris Goodall. I do have reasons for hope. Our clever brains, the resilience of nature, the indomitable human spirit, and above all, the commitment of young people when they are empowered to act. I'd like to make one last conclusion. The sign of an important book is that it stands the test of time. The book came out, I think, relatively early in 2025. Since then, the world has changed and changed considerably. In this, the Caribbean and Guyana had an ally in the Biden administration, which prioritized the issue of environmental security, including financing for projects to build resilience and sustainability. The current Trump administration does not, and it's much more transactionally driven. That said, the perils and promises raised by Professor Griffith remain exceedingly topical, and his book is well worth the read. I'll make one last point. I wish I were there in the Caribbean. The weather up here has been horribly cold, and I'll leave it at that.
Oh my gosh. Thank you, Dr. McDonald, for sharing those insights. I fully agree. You mentioned about the weather here in the region. Okay, so now we will turn our attention to the panelists. We'll begin with Dr. Lorraine Sobers. Dr. Sobers lectures at the University of the West Indies, St. Augustine. Her PhD is in petroleum engineering, and she has 18 years experience in the energy sector. She's also fellow of the Caribbean Policy Consortium, and she will speak tonight on the book's implication for oil exploration in Trinidad and Tobago. So I'll just take both of you at the same time. Dr. McBean will follow Dr. Sobers' presentation. And Dr. McBean is the Executive Director of the UWI's Mona School of Business and Management. He has a Doctor of Philosophy, a DPhil degree in engineering from the University of Oxford. And he has over 25 years of experience as a senior executive. Dr. McBean has served on several boards of private and public sector companies. So tonight, Dr. McBean will be speaking on the book's implication for oil exploration in Jamaica. So we'll start first with Dr. Sobers and then followed by Dr. McBean's presentation. Dr. Sobers.
Good evening, everyone. It's really a pleasure to be part of this panel and to be invited to endorse this book and to speak about it. Now, I have been working, it's probably more than 18 years now, the years just, the numbers just getting bigger and bigger. But I've been working on the climate change and the oil production side for a number of years. And as I was preparing this presentation, I felt that things were moving so slowly on the climate change side of things. And by the time I got to the end of what I wanted to present, I realized, oh my goodness, this has come full circle. So let me tell you the full circle before I get into it. In the year 2001, I was awarded a scholarship, a production sharing contrast scholarship. And it was between the government and ExxonMobil. And I studied overseas. I studied in Texas. And my work focused on storing carbon dioxide. So we're reducing CO2 emissions in gas reservoirs. And then I went on to look at, I came back to Trinidad, I realized, you know what, everybody just wants to produce more oil. They're not really interested in reducing CO2 emissions. So I said, okay, for my next thesis, that I was a PhD thesis now, I'm going to see how we can do the two at the same time. And so it comes full circle with this book and this book launch. How are we going to bring the two together? Because I've been walking that line in my research, in my teaching, for a couple decades now. And so what I would start off with is the implications for Trinidad and Tobago. And here we are with Exxon. And I'm quoting here the Vice President and Head of Global Exploration. Under the headline published by Oil Now, it says, Exxon now controls deep water asset larger than surface area of Trinidad and Tobago. This is the right time, he says. We're going to bring excellent technology and capability directly from Guyana, leverage our presence, rigs, and development concepts, and move at pace. So as you know, Exxon left Trinidad, I can't remember exactly when, but probably around 2006, after a few years, and they did not get what they expected in their exploration. And now they have returned, and they've come from a different angle, saying that they would now have a better understanding of their exploration in Trinidad based on their capability in Guyana. I was like, wow, look at that. With over 20 years, how things have changed, right? So I just have about two more quotes, right? So a 2024 study by Houston-based Energy Analytics, Reuters, said that firms suggest that Trinidad and Tobago ultra-deep water reserves could hold potential comparable to the Stabroek Block. Now, that would be great for Trinidad and Tobago because we have not had a good understanding of the ultra-deep. It's very expensive and it's not well understood, the geology out there. So when the geology is not well understood, the contracts are not as strong, and sometimes, as in the case of ExxonMobil, when they in Trinidad in the 2000s, they opt not to move to the next phase because there wasn't promise for the exploration. So here we have a report from Trinidad and Tobago Energy Chamber saying that ExxonMobil has committed to a structured 3-phase exploration program. So that means they can opt out according to what they see. And it can include seismic data acquisition, exploration, drilling. I think I'm blocking myself here. Should commercial discoveries be made? The agreement stipulates royalty payments, profit sharing with the government, and provisions for cost recovery. Now, in the early part of my career, I decided to work with the Ministry of Energy and Energy Industries. I said decided to because a lot of people thought, and they would say to me, why don't you work for one of the big oil companies like this one and that one, you get paid so much more. But I got a glimpse into how these contracts work. And I thought it was very interesting. And I decided, to take up the offer to work there. And so I am going to give a perspective from the outside, looking in the same way that this book does. And in my endorsement, I said, from the outside looking into Guyana's mighty porous and vulnerable coastline, people of the world who stop to take notice are anxious about the effects of climate change on South America's only English-speaking country. And the same applies to Trinidad and Tobago. We, of course, as a small island developing state, are threatened by climate change, rise in sea levels, intrusion of salt water into fresh water, more powerful hurricanes, more frequent storms, more flooding, a threat basically to lives and livelihoods, right? So I worked on that side, but I'm taking myself back to when I had the opportunity to look at how these contracts were developed, in a sense, and administered. So I was part of the support team as a new graduate. And what they would do is put together a team with some engineers, geologists. I said engineers first because I'm an engineer, but the geologists were the real star of the show. Economists, or people who do the economic modeling, and legal officers. And so the geologists would look at the acreage and they would, try to estimate what kind of potential, what size of deposits there should be, how deep it should be drilled and so on before there are any bids coming in. What was interesting to me was the economic modeling was actually done by people who graduated from the chemical engineering program at UWI. They were relatively young people and they did an excellent job. And I actually probably created my own spreadsheets at that time, the complexity of these contracts. So for me, on the outside looking in and hearing comments about contracts being good, bad, or not, I would not venture to comment on something like that unless I did the full economic modeling, which takes into account, of course, the time frame. It takes into account the price of oil, production volumes, how deep, what expenditure is expected. And in chapter 3, I see that the contracts are actually addressed and the comments made within the public sphere was also addressed. So I'm just giving a perspective of how the contract would come together, like what could have happened in the kitchen. So in preparing for these contracts, the technocrats would have had a short list, like, okay, which blocks are we going to put out to bid? Now we could have a competitive bid run, or as in the case recently with Exxon, they could approach the government directly and, express their interest in a block. They have to decide whether it's oil prone or gas prone. For years and years in Trinidad and Tobago, it has been gas prone. And we're actually hoping that this ultra deep would be oil prone, right? The challenge with this, the risk in this is that if we have on either side, if the government team, the technocrats, the geologists, the engineers, and so on, if they have an incorrect evaluation of the acreage, then their stipulation or their basement for accepting a bid can be too high or too low, right? So when they look at the acreage, so when they, a company or even the government itself has acquired 3D seismic, they would look at that and for themselves evaluate the probability of having oil or gas in a particular volume. If that is wrong, it means that the government can accept a bid below its value, or if they have overestimated how much they expect, then they may actually reject bids that are fairly good. So I can understand in the commentary in the book when the persons quoted are mainly Ulrich Trotz, Ulrich Trotz and Raphael Trotman, when they speak about the expectations of people for a pioneer exploration and what those feelings are. And I'm glad that the book captures it because sometimes people forget when things become a bit more routine. The opening of bids is also an important part for transparency. And before we even get to the opening of bids, the closing of the bid round, delays with that is not a good thing. The implication for what goes on in Guyana and what can happen with Trinidad and Tobago exploration, it means that we would have to get better at how we administer and how we conduct our competitive bid rounds, because companies like to move quickly after results have been announced. As they say, time is money. And after that has been announced, they really like to get things moving with their seismic and so on. There's a lot of timing that goes on with the vessels that are used for any of the work coming forward, and they have to track that for years going forward and be able to keep up with their work plan. So I would say one of the implications for Trinidad and Tobago exploration is that we will have to do a better job or a good job at conducting our bid rounds, assessment, and award of bids and start of work in a timely manner. Because as some of the companies who be looking to work with us, they may have rigs and so on that need to move from nearby Guyana operations to do things across in Trinidad. So we have to kind of be cognizant of that so that their cost, which affects us, can be controlled. Let me see. So excessive delays can put a damper on the expectations of the early bidders, and it can reduce confidence in the progress. I think Guyana did pretty well with the closing date, but some believe that delays were expected given that it was at the time commenting on the bid round that opened in 2023 and closed later on that year, given that it was the first one and that it's a new area. So after the bids were announced, I think the way Guyana went about it was interesting. They said they announced which blocks received bids, but they did not necessarily link saying, okay, this block, a particular block would have gotten 4 bids and another one got none and another one 8 and so on. That's the kind of information that I agree with the way Guyana went about it. It does not have to be, published, and what it allows the government to do is have leverage on the interpretation for a particular block. So after a company looks at the data, I hope I'm not getting too technical, but after a company looks at the data, they will decide whether a block is something worth going after. And it may not be in the interest of the government to let on that information to potential bidders for a second round to know what, kind of give a hint of what the data looks like. Is it exciting? Is it not exciting? That kind of thing. It's actually like that, and I don't know if Trinidad and Tobago would consider continuing with that. I'll just close off on my talk here with the exploration side of things and talk about here the Extractive Industries Transparency Initiative. Guyana has gotten a fairly low, their compliance was categorized as fairly low. I would say it's early days, and they have tried to do much better in the latest submission to the EITI. On the other hand, Trinidad and Tobago is considered to be fairly high, or actually just high compliance. And that is after, almost 20 years of doing those submissions. But these are things that for Trinidad and Tobago looks well, the stability, the availability of infrastructure and so on. That works well for companies that are considering the overall risk, not only the geological risk, but also the risk related to the administration of these contracts. So when I switch across to climate change now, I feel like I'm moving in slow pace. Oil exploration is going so fast in different parts of the world so quickly. And then we have the same discussions year after year. I've been following for at least 20 years of what has been going on the environmental front. So Trinidad and Tobago has decided with our declining gas and our declining oil production that we could leverage on our infrastructure, leverage on our expertise and location, and become a green hydrogen hub. Now in 2018, we had a vision, a climate change policy, and we're working within the UNFCCC to reduce our emissions. What I thought was interesting, as you can see in the box below, that there's a significant disparity between the percentage of emissions to be eliminated and the funding allocated. I will just use this slide to say here that I believe our CO2 emissions in Trinidad and Tobago is an industrial problem, and it needs an industrial solution. We are not doing well with renewable energy. The green hydrogen policy that came out last year is supposed to address this, and they're looking at more wind energy, but we have very ambitious targets and have not kept up with those. The strategy is that green hydrogen is going to become the cornerstone of the economy. It's in keeping with the Paris Agreement to drive decarbonization and sustainable growth and transition from gray to green hydrogen. As I said before, same thing for oil. It's leveraging on the existing infrastructure, basically within the petrochemical industry and the expertise and so on. And it's creating opportunities for the export of green ammonia and methanol, which is in step with the CBAM and other type of restrictions, that is cross-border adjustment mechanism for CO2 emissions and so on. The targets are for wind energy, as I said before, looking at creating 25 gigawatts of electricity of green hydrogen production, and by 2065, targeting 4 million tons of green hydrogen per annum. So I'll just close off here with the endorsement that I had for this book, that when you look at oil production and CO2 emissions, you know, it comes down to not just the contracts, not just the targets, not just the policies. It takes into consideration the economics, the politics, the context, the operation, and sometimes the philosophical perspective from both sides. And I think the book addressed this really well. I said in my endorsement that each chapter is supported by historical facts, which we need, insightful analysis, and relevant references to bring a reader a balanced and comprehensive view of the conundrum from without and within Guyana. And we face the same within Trinidad in a different way. As history is being made in Guyana, this book represents a conversational review. And I chose that word conversational because it's easy to read and it's really intended for the average person who has not sat in on these contracts, as I have had, be able to understand what is going on and to bring together everything that has happened so far. So a conversational review. I like the tone of the book, of what has happened so far and the future possibilities, and this was presented in clear context. That's my contribution for today, and thank you for inviting me.
Okay, thank you. Over to you, Dr. McVie.
Okay, thank you. And good evening to everybody, and to my fellow speakers and panelists as well. I was impressed by the book, the breadth of topics that it covered, and I think it did justice to the 426 pages. But it, as Dr. Sober said, it really became a read which was thoughtful, insightful, and allowed you to probe in the different areas. So in taking lessons from the book on Jamaica, so Jamaica has been for quite a long time, certainly for a significant part of my lifetime, been prospecting for oil. And when I look at the history of oil in Guyana, it's a similar story where you had an over 50-year, prospecting for commercial quantities of oil. The assumption there, or the need for Jamaica, is to say, okay, having watched what has happened in Guyana and also in Trinidad, what lessons do we learn? And as the book rightly pointed out, Guyana is now both a petrochemical champion as well as an environmental champion. And the environmental championship came before, but now it's exploiting. So that's the conundrum and the paradox for me that is applicable to Jamaica. Jamaica is an interesting ecosystem. You go from mountains as high as 7,500 feet, which with all the different environmental ecosystems, to the coast where most people live, and which generates a lot of economy. So for me, oil exploration has the potential, if, for example, you had an oil spill, to hit several important industries. There's tourism, which I think accounts for about 10% of GDP, although my tourism friends would like to claim that they generate 40% of GDP activity, but it's very important to us. You have fishing and other marine interests. Jamaica is also a transshipment point, and you have several important ports, mainly on the south coast, but also some important ones on the north coast. So what happens in the marine environment becomes critical and crucial for us. We've also been champions of environmental stewardship, because as an island, our coasts are susceptible to sea rises. And in fact, we have seen very consequential impacts in terms of beaches disappearing. We have had to abandon parts of the coastal road, most notably in Falmouth, where the sea has reclaimed a lot of the road that used to lead into Falmouth. So we have to consider that when we're going for oil. But like Guyana, poverty is a real problem. And it was interesting to see it through the lens of a Guyanese national talking about these two dilemmas. And I think Professor Griffiths does a great job explaining why, it's hard for anybody to just ignore massive oil reserves. Because in the Caribbean, where especially those of us who have not had the benefit of petrodollars or other forms of economic activity that spread to the mass, it's very tempting to exploit oil. And I think that how we exploit it becomes part of that discussion. One thing that struck me was the National Resource Fund. And I thought it was good that they had set up a National Resource Fund. But it was also interesting in the book where you saw a lot of challenges to how the fund was being used, how withdrawals were made. And I found it curious as well that the fund was situated in the Federal Reserve Bank of New York. And that's the worst place to have your assets stored because you get very low interest. And I think it would be better used if you had a sovereign wealth fund approach of, say, Norway or Kuwait, where they run an investment fund, which in time generates significant assets back to the country. The debate over the agreements I found interesting as to whether Guyana had gotten a good deal. And from a business perspective, I thought about it. If you're an unknown entity, the first deal you do is unlikely to be in your favor. And so I would expect that the future deals post Exxon would be much more advantageous to the country. I'd hope that they'd be, because if you're an unknown quantity, it's different from if you now have proven oil reserves that everybody wants. Which brings me to another area of the book that led me to pause. The whole question about transparency, public trust, and trust in those who we have chosen to govern us. And that is where I think our leaders come under the microscope. And in thinking about how we govern, we had a bauxite boom several decades ago in Jamaica. We don't have much to show for it. And we still have bauxite, alumina. Guyana also has bauxite, alumina. And the key obligation, I think, on leadership is to have a clear view of what are we going to do with the resources for those now, and how do we provide some of those resources to benefit future negotiations. Oil can't spoil became famous across the Caribbean, and it's true, but oil can come to an end. And I think for Jamaica, how we do how we go about with oil exploration and agreements, should we ever find oil, I think has to be governed by that stricture in mind. And so in concluding, I found the book a very interesting and easy read. And it's a book that I will go back to read in a more deliberate way without the timelines of having to discuss it. So I'll pause there for now, and thank you very much.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Doctors McBean and Sobers. All right. So we're at this stage now where we're opening the floor for questions. Any questions in the chat? I want to kickstart the section with the question and answer. And my question is really to maybe all three could take a jab at it, but it's targeted at Dr. McDonald. As you were presenting, it seemed to me that the Guyana situation is really almost like a chicken and egg situation. It's this paradoxical situation where oil will provide wealth, resources to fund resilience, but at the same time, by exploring oil, it's depleting or possibly could lead to the depletion of the environment. So my question is, can there be a proper balance between oil exploration and also the preservation of the environment or environmental resilience at the same time?
You want me to go first, or?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I mean, I think the answer is yes, but it's a big challenge. I mean, you look at kind of the gold standard is Norway, where Norway has exploited hydrocarbon wealth, but also pays very close attention to the issues of transparency, but also to make sure the wealth gets into the population, but the environment's very important in this. And I think one of the big challenges any country faces with petro wealth is one, corruption's easy, awful lot of money comes in. Do you lose control of your currency and have inflation? And you look at the cases that sit out there like Angola or Nigeria, Chad, a lot of these countries have had a huge infusion of money, but what do you have to show for it? So I think there has to be a balance that's maintained in this process. I know that people in Guyana, and for that matter in Suriname, also have been studying very closely as to what type of models to follow in terms of harvesting the petrocarbon wealth. And I think, it goes back to what something Professor Ivalo said about having a responsible elite, people that are really dedicated to this issue. And I think without that, then you run into the problems, because you can have great models, but if you don't have the consensus among the elite to do the right thing, then you can easily run astray.
Absolutely. Thank you. Dr. McBean, you want to make a comment about that, followed by Dr. Sobers, if possible?
Yes. As Prof. McDonald said, it is the conundrum, and nothing works perfectly. And I think that's what sometimes frames a lot of recent debates, as if it's binary. It's either you do this or either you do that. I don't think any human progress has come without some cost, right? So if you think about, and I smiled when I saw this in the book, petrochemical industry has caused longer life, better access to fertilizers. So nothing comes with, just without any impact. The question is, how do we balance the impact? And, it's interesting because there's one study, or three studies nominated. Two of them said Guyana is a bigger carbon sink in terms of capturing carbon from the atmosphere, as opposed to any calculation of its impact through its oil industry. You know, and if you think about it, the sea defenses in Guyana have been a source of concern for many years now. This gives them a chance to at least repair and probably extend sea defenses against climate change for quite some time. So for me, it's just a balance. How do you come out of this with a set of outcomes where the pluses outweigh the minuses?
Thank you. Dr. Sobers?
Thank you for that question. It allowed me to address one of the points I didn't touch on, which was that at the conference of the parties to the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, one of the issues that they raised was having just and inclusive planning of the energy transition, acknowledging that developing countries need to balance social needs, political and environmental demands. How they would actually go about that, I don't know. My position is really that countries need to decide for themselves what that balance is. The truth of the matter is if Guyana or Trinidad stop their production, it's not going to climate change overall. It's not going to make a dent in global warming. It's not. People might get excited about it. And I'm going to be controversial here. The very people who took flights by commercial airlines or private airlines and rail cars fueled by fossil fuels, those very people who go out to protest, they have found a balance that what they're doing is worth their carbon emissions, and I suppose in some way they will offset it because some of them look at that keenly. But to have, I have actually an interesting quote here from the Tyndall Center, where they look at the phasing out pathways for fossil fuel production. And they suggested that the richest countries should phase out their oil and gas production by 2034. The lower income nations longer to replace their income from fossil fuel. And the poorest countries should be given until 2050 to end production. And then they went on to say that there's no practical emission space for any nation to develop any new production facilities of any kind. As I said, I think each country needs to decide for themselves because they need to be able to take care of themselves in case of any disaster, and also to pull themselves and their people out of poverty. It needs to be something that they decide for themselves, recognizing that they can produce as best as they could in a sustainable manner, but it's not going to be a significant impact on CO2 emissions.
Thank you. Just about two other questions I want to ask. I think this one is geared toward Dr. Sobers. As you were speaking about the contracts, you spoke about the transparency of the contracts. And I want to ask, are these contracts published for public scrutiny, or are these more involved in the private domain, more private diplomacy kind of domain, these oil related contracts in Trinidad and Tobago?
Yeah, the format of the contract, so the model contract that is available on the website of the Ministry of Energy, and what is available for public scrutiny is the contribution from each contract on an annual basis. So you would be able to see the amounts that cost recovery for scholarships, for training, for taxes, everything. You see everything that every company has contributed to the government. I don't think the final contract and the splits, I could be wrong. I'd have to, I've been away from that for a little bit, but the final splits and so on, I don't believe that is there. The person may, I suppose, have privy to the signature bonus, the royalty, and so on and so forth. But for us, especially for the gas contracts, the splits become very involved. I don't know if people can do anything with it when they see it, because there's certain amounts that would be due before commercialization, after commercialization, and it goes up or it changes for each volume. So below 100 million, so on and so forth. So for me to hear people just, off the top of their head say, "Oh, this is a horrible contract," I was like, wow, because the rest of us use complex spreadsheets to put everything together over time and then do the net present value for it and consider risk and all of that. But transparency comes through ultimately the reporting to the extractive industries transparency initiative. Whatever that is, I can't remember right. Yeah.
Dr. McDonald, you wanted to see, you look like you're about to make a comment?
No, I'm
Okay.
thinking of all the spreadsheets I've gone through in my career. It's been a lot, and I understand very much what Dr. Talbert is talking about.
Right. All right. So I want to touch a little bit on a point you raised, which relates to part of what you were doing in the presentation, Dr. McDonald. You spoke about the changing geopolitical landscape. So my question is, how will, in your view, how do you think this will impact on Guyana's oil exploration? The present, as you put it, the kind of transactional leadership that we see coming out of the United States now, as compared to how it was prior under the Biden's administration. How will this impact, in your view, on Guyana's oil exploration?
It's a good question. I mean, I think I would say there's two things here. One, the fact that the world is changing, and one of the big changes was Europe's move away from dependency on Russia. Well, who did the Netherlands, the UK, France, a number of other European countries go to? They went to Guyana. Trump pushing India about buying Russian oil. What's the option for India? Well, perhaps they go back to Venezuela to some degree, but certainly there's a repertoire between India and Guyana, especially in terms of populations, and there's been a work at doing that. So I think the transactional dimension that comes out of a more power politics, bare-knuckled approach as you're getting out of the United States, there are benefits, I think, there for Guyana. I also think that because you have ExxonMobil and Chevron, which are two of the largest U.S. multinational oil companies, heavily engaged in the region, not just in Guyana, but also to some degree in Suriname and also Venezuela, this is an area of acute U.S. strategic interest. And I think that benefits Guyana. I mean, in some ways, I think Guyana is probably in the best geopolitical position it's been in decades. Guyana has what the rest of the world wants right now. And it's up to Guyana to do whatever profit they get from it for them to decide where it goes. But right now, they're in a driver's seat that a lot of other countries aren't. Now, the oil market has volatility. You look back to 2014, or if you were in oil in 2012, 2013, the world was your oyster. And Hugo Chavez made great use of oil money coming in. 2014, the market crashes, and it's difficulty after difficulty that occurs. But I think the advantage Guyana has is it has a pretty strong pro-Western track record. It has engagement of major U.S. corporations. However, it is open to China. It's potentially open to India. Maybe it's open to Petronas, Total. It puts Guyana in a good position. but that position has to be managed, and there's going to be a lot of ups and downs going forward in terms of the geopolitical environment.
Absolutely. I don't know if Dr. McBean or Dr. Sobers want to comment here, or
Not
particularly.
yeah, not much
Yes.
to add. Not much to add.
Right.
Yeah, not much to add. I think it's been covered
Yeah.
pretty much there. Except I'll add one thing which strikes me. How will the new situation in Venezuela affect Guyana?
Yeah.
Because if Venezuela has the largest proven reserves and it is now under the thumb of the US, will it change its posture towards Guyana in terms of Venezuela claiming parts of the Essequibo? Could it force a particular negotiated settlement, which is in its favor? And that's in the realm. I mean, 2 years ago, this would have sounded crazy, right?
Yeah.
But in today's world, so I think that's the one thing that strikes me about the geopolitical situation in that part of the world.
If I could just add something to that. Actually, I think I've got a piece coming out in the National Interest today on Guyana versus Venezuela. Huge difference between Guyana and Venezuela. Guyana's energy program is up and running. As Dr. Sobers has mentioned, the technology, the workforce, it's pretty darn good. It's up to date. Venezuela, the lure of what the Trump administration wants, $100 billion to jumpstart an industry in Venezuela, which has been stripped of its parts. It's been horribly mismanaged. Corruption's rampant. And I think it was the head of ExxonMobil basically said Venezuela at this stage is not investable. And I think Guyana has a real advantage there. The longer this goes on, that advantage is, and if money flows into Venezuela, that advantage does begin to diminish.
Mhm.
Absolutely. Okay. Dr. Sobers?
When I was asked to present sometime, I think that would be November, I actually spoke to Professor Griffith. I was like, I do not know what to say about the politics. What was
Okay.
with Trinidad and Tobago and Venezuela? As I
Yes.
don't know what to say. I don't know what to
That's-
say. Because I would have relatives calling. I was like, "How are you all in Trinidad?" I was like, "We're fine. We are going about it as normal." So it's been very confusing to me. And as I said a few years ago, we couldn't have imagined that this is where we would be. Now, I still don't know what to say. but we're fine. But there was an anticipation, at least in Trinidad, that we would have some sort of conflict or unrest that was going on for a few months. Disrupting regular life. It was a real concern of people, coming to the island and leaving. So we'll see how things turn out.
Right. Okay. Dr. McDonald, I know you have a piece that's coming out on Venezuela and Guyana soon. And I'm wondering, do you think that with the change in the Venezuelan regime, that will be almost the end of the issue surrounding the Essequibo region, where both are claiming ownership?
Sadly, no.
Guyana and Venezuela.
Yeah, sadly,
There's
no.
pause there.
I think the Essequibo is a wonderful tool for any ambitious Venezuelan leader to use to pull out the flag of nationalism and say that, you mentioned questions of colonial period, gunboat diplomacy, this deal was forced on us. That's the Venezuelan reread of history, but the deal was forced upon us. We really aren't comfortable with it. So no, I don't think the issue goes away. I don't think the issue is foremost for the current government in Venezuela because I don't think they even know, does Delcy Rodriguez survive to the end of the year? I don't know. I don't think she knows. Does Caballo, who's the interior minister, does he make a play for power, or does was it Vladimir Putin, Padin, the head of the military? And they all have different factions. So I think that Venezuela's house is divided, and I think that helps Guyana in terms of dealing with the border issue, such as it stands.
All right, thank you very much. I think we are almost out of time. Let me see if there are any questions here. There's one online here. Why is it necessary to consult the elites to make use of our own resources, whether for political or economic demands? And I'm not sure which country they're speaking about when they say our own resources. So I'm not even sure who to direct this to. But I think I start with Dr. McBean. Maybe this is a question about leadership, consulting the elites to make decisions about resources, whether it's political or economic ones.
Yes. And I think this depends on how you view the elites. So you could have elites who are experts or educated. So for example, I'd say Dr. Sobers is somebody who is an elite operator in the petroleum industry. And that's separate from saying, well, I'm an elite because of my family lineage, my political connections. So I think it would hinge on what you consider the elite. The elites have gotten a bad name all around. Even us at the university have been classified as the residents of the intellectual ghetto at times. And I think that's a trust question. I really do. That it comes down to, why would I consult you if I don't trust you? Even if I don't know about the subject area, I still don't trust you enough to consult you. But what I would say who should be, or the responsibility of the middle class in our societies is really to keep that line of honesty, ethics, morals. That's the role of the middle class, especially the educated middle class. And when we abandon that, we lose the trust of everybody.
That's a good note in which to end. Just to wrap up, Prof. Griffith's book, Oil and Climate Change in Guyana's Wet Neighborhood, Probing Promise and Potential Peril, challenges Guyana and indeed other countries in the Caribbean to think boldly in using oil well, not only for consumption, but to build resilience, to build seawalls, renewable energy, to invest in education, and also in regional cooperation. For those attendees who are interested in purchasing a copy of the book, either for academic or other personal use, or to make it as a gift for a friend, it is currently available at Ian Randall Publishers, and that's online, ianrandallpublishers.com. It will also be available at the UWI Bookshop for those students who are online, so you can purchase your own copy. We, at this stage, express gratitude to Dr. Vassiani for bringing us greeting as the head of the Department of Government, and also Mr. Randall for publishing the book, Oil and Climate Change in Guyana's Wet Neighborhood, and also for contextualizing his work, the book, among the recent publications on Guyana and Jamaica. I also want to personally express our gratitude and congratulations to Professor Ivor Griffith for publishing yet another masterpiece on the Caribbean. And we express our gratitude as well to Dr. Scott MacDonald for sharing your insights on the book on Prof. Griffith's behalf. Thanks, Dr. MacDonald, for rising to this task and performing so well on such a short notice. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We express gratitude also to our eloquent presenters, all three, Dr. Scott MacDonald, also Dr. McBean and Dr. Sobers, for serving as panelists and for sharing their insights on the book's implications for oil exploration in Jamaica and Trinidad and Tobago. To the Department of Government and the Mona School of Business and Management teams, Mr. Hamilton and Mr. Henry, the entire team, we express our gratitude for assistance with logistics, production of the flyer, and of course, technical support. Thank you. And to our audience, we thank you for attending and for staying the course with us. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, we have come to the end of the book launch, Oil and Climate Change in Guyana's Wet Neighborhood, Probing Promise and Potential Peril. Good night.
Good night.
Good night.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Good night.
All right. Thanks a lot. Appreciate it.